The UK is experiencing its biggest increase in rent prices ever, with a staggering 33% rise in just 4 years. When prices spike like that, it typically signals a lack of supply and too much demand. Given that this situation is unlikely to change anytime soon, many are wondering, is the UK rental crisis here to stay? Will rents just keep climbing higher and higher? Rather than simply accepting these figures at face value, we decided to dig into the details to understand exactly what's happening in the UK rental market right now. In this video, we're going to explain what we found and how this situation will impact both investors and tenants. But first, let's take a look at the developments over the past few years that have led us to this point. Firstly, as you may have noticed, rents have absolutely skyrocketed. Back in August 2020, the average UK rent was £959 per month. Fast forward to June 2024, and that figure has shot up to £1,299, a whopping 35% increase in just under 4 years. So, what's driving this rapid rise? There are probably two main reasons for the surge in rents. First, let's talk about everyone's favorite group, landlords. When rents increase, people are quick to blame greedy landlords, and in this case, they might have a point, but it's not the whole story. Over the past few years, interest rates have also increased dramatically, meaning many landlords have seen the costs skyrocket. As a result, they've increased rents as much as possible to soften the blow to their cash flow. However, landlords can only increase rents to whatever the market is willing to pay. From running my own portfolio and a letting agency for years, I know that if a property is even slightly overpriced compared to others on the market, it will just sit there empty. Much of what we've seen is actually landlords catching up. In the past, they often kept existing tenants on rents below market rate, not increasing rents even as market rates rose, either to keep good tenants or, let's face it, sometimes out of laziness. But when costs went up, they had to take a hard look at these tenancies. We've received loads of messages from landlords saying things like, "My tenant's been there for years and is paying £400 a month less than they should be. I need that money now, but I can't increase the rent by that much all at once, or they won't be able to afford it. What should I do?" This has been a real dilemma for many landlords, resulting in rents for existing tenants being increased more than usual. The second big factor is the classic issue of supply and demand. On the supply side, we've seen a decrease in the number of rental properties. It's no secret that many landlords are leaving the market. There are fewer outstanding buy-to-let mortgages now than there were last year, and research from Hamptons shows that the number of properties owned by landlords has been falling since 2016. You might think, well, if landlords are selling, does it really make a difference? The buyers must be either other landlords or people who'd otherwise be renting. The number of properties hasn't changed. But here's the thing: owner-occupied properties tend to have fewer people living in them. So, even if the total number of houses stays the same, and the balance shifts from renting to owning, you could end up with a shortage because there are fewer people living in each home. The demand side is even more interesting. One factor is that fewer renters than usual have transitioned to becoming owner-occupiers, as they've also been affected by higher mortgage rates. This means fewer people are leaving the rental sector while more people are entering it. Additionally, there's another significant factor at play: the massive influx of people moving to the UK. According to Zoopla, the UK has the same number of rental properties as it did in 2015, despite a population increase of more than 2.2 million. The recent migration figures are truly staggering. Net migration was 764,000 in 2022 and another 685,000 in 2023. That's about 1.5 million people in just 2 years. Statistically, when people first arrive in a new country, they're much more likely to rent than buy, which puts even more pressure on the rental sector. Don't get me wrong, this isn't an anti-immigration point. However, If 1.5 million extra people are looking for a place to rent and the number of rental properties stays the same, it's pretty obvious what's going to happen to rental prices. In fact, Capital Economics estimates that immigration has accounted for a third of the rental growth in the UK since COVID-19. So, there you have it. A perfect storm of landlords playing catch-up with their costs, a shrinking pool of rental properties, and a rapidly growing population all competing for the same homes. It's like a game of musical chairs, but with sky-high stakes for landlords and tenants alike. As a property investor, you should never take the headlines at face value, so we dug deeper into the data to see if the current situation is as dire as the papers suggest. Interestingly, there is evidence that the worst may be behind us. The latest survey from RICS, the professional body for surveyors, shows that 38% of their members believe that rents will continue to rise, while new listings from landlords have declined. This does support the idea that rents will keep going up, but it's not an overwhelming consensus. In fact, it's a significant drop from the 66% who believed rents would keep rising in November 2021. In other words, it doesn't paint the picture of a market that's entirely out of balance. Moreover, separate data from Zoopla strongly suggests that the real rental boom is over, but that only becomes clear when you look beyond the headlines. For example, back in October 2021, rents for newly let properties were growing at a staggering rate of 16%, but that growth has now slowed to 6.6%. You might think, 6.6% is still pretty high, and you'd be right, but remember, that's an annualized figure. It represents the percentage change over the past 12 months. What's more interesting is that Zoopla also tracks how rents have changed over the last 3 months, providing a more recent trend. If you project that out over a year, UK-wide rent inflation is now less than 3%, a significant slowdown. But wait, there's more. In London, rent inflation has actually turned negative, meaning rents are falling. It may be hard to believe, but after years of skyrocketing rents, we're actually seeing prices come down in some areas. Of course, there's a strong regional variation here. London and the South East are seeing relatively low or even negative rent inflation, while other areas, like Scotland, the North East, and the West Midlands, are still experiencing significant increases. So, while the overall trend is towards slower growth, some areas are still seeing substantial hikes. So, what does this all mean? For landlords, it looks like the days of blockbuster rent increases might be over, and honestly, that's probably a good thing. When rents grow as fast as they have been over the last few years, it only strengthens calls for rent controls. While rent controls might seem appealing, they're not a good solution and would cause all kinds of problems, but that's a discussion for another video. From a landlord's perspective, a rental income stream that keeps pace with inflation is perfectly adequate. If someone offered me guaranteed rent increases indexed to inflation forever, I'd happily take it. Given the fundamental forces at play, landlords exiting the market, a rising population, and insufficient new homes being built to meet demand, it's hard to see how rents wouldn't at least keep up with inflation for many years to come. While the rental market remains tight, it appears we're moving toward a more sustainable situation. The explosive growth we've seen over the past few years seems to be cooling off, and that might just be good news for everyone in the long run. Now that we've dug beneath the headlines and uncovered the truth of what's happening in the rental market, what should you do with this information as a landlord or property investor? First, if you have a vacant property and are looking to rent it out, be careful. We're increasingly seeing landlords and agents overprice properties for rent. Why? Because they've gotten into the habit of automatically raising rents each time. However, depending on when you last let your property, you might not be able to increase the rent this time. In fact, in some areas, the market rent may actually be lower. I know that sounds crazy after everything we've just talked about, but it's happening. So, don't just slap a "for rent" sign on your property with a higher price and let it sit empty for weeks on end. Don't just take your agent's word for what they think it should be marketed at. Instead, go to Rightmove, enter the postcode, and check the box to see Let Agreed properties. This will show you what's currently on the market and what price was being asked for properties that have already been let, although you won't see the final agreed price. By being realistic with your pricing, you'll get your property rented faster. Not only that, but you'll also have a wider pool of applicants to choose from, and trust me, having more options when selecting tenants is always a good thing. An occupied property rented to the right person at a slightly lower rent is always better than an empty property costing you money every week. Remember, rents might not be skyrocketing like they were, but they're still rising in most areas, and all the underlying factors are in place for them to continue doing so. So, whenever a tenancy comes up for renewal, check the local market and see if a rent increase is justified. You might not decide to go all the way up to the market rent because you value your tenant and want to give them a good deal, but you could edge it up gradually to avoid finding yourself in the situation that many landlords have faced, where you're suddenly miles away from what you could be getting for the property. Thank you for watching.